Hi, my name's Dave Haynes. I'm one of the founders of the Preset Group. I recently did a presentation for an investor conference in New York on digital signage, and I was asked if I could provide the deck to the people I presented to, and I said happy to do that, but it really needs audio to be effective. So what I thought I would do is record the presentation. Just a little bit on me. I have a consulting group with a partner, Pat Helberg, and we work with operators, vendors, and investors, helping them get their digital signage plans organized or revisited and optimized. I also write a blog called 16.9 that you've probably found already if you're looking at this. If not, worth a look. There's more than 3,000 posts on there about digital signage compiled over the last 7 years or so. As a consultant, I get asked all the time by different companies to speak with them and potentially work with them. And early in our discussions, I tend to have the big moment where I say, look, guys, if we're going to work together, you have to be prepared for that time when I'm going to look across the table at you and say, you know what? Your baby's ugly. It's not meant to be an insult. That's not how this is framed with them. It's a way of saying very bluntly that what you think is beautiful maybe isn't so beautiful or awesome. And I think that's how a lot of owners and operators out in the digital signage ecosystem, the digital out-of-home ecosystem, think about what they're doing. They think what they're doing is terrific, but a lot of their babies are in fact ugly. They are ugly in design, in the strategy, or in the execution. They're just doing things wrong, or they're a little bit off, and they need to think about them, and somebody needs to tell them, frankly. Their audience, the first thing for them to remember is audiences are not a right. Just because you hang a screen in a public environment, in a store, whatever, doesn't mean you have an audience. It just means you have a screen. You have to have information, you have to have content on there that makes people want to look. That audience is not captive. You don't have them looking at your screen just because you put it there. They have options. They have smart devices. They have tablets. You know, there's no end of things for them to look at these days, and they have connectivity, so they don't have to have stuff already on there. You see this on mass transit platforms. You see this in subways. You see it everywhere. The minute somebody has some free time, they go to their phone. So what you're doing on the screens better get their attention and make them want to look there instead. You need, as this says, to earn viewership. You don't just get it as a right. Programming and design needs to understand and respect the audience, the place, and the moment, the context of what's going on. What are they thinking about? What's in their heads? What's important to them at that time, not in general. I could go on endlessly about all the ugly babies I see out there, but I don't know that that's terribly useful to anybody. It turns into a rant, and that's not what this is about. Instead, I'd like to talk about the research that's out there that provides cues, that's instructive, that tells us what we should be thinking about when we're putting networks together. When you walk into any kind of visual environment, like a big mass merch retailer or a smaller retailer, an airport, whatever it is, there's a lot of visual cues out there. In something like a Walmart, there may be as many as 5,000 different pieces of visual communication, all competing for eyeballs. So, as people walk into these environments, they're noting, they're scanning the environment, they're looking at things, and they're noting the visual cues that they like. And they're doing that in like half a second. They don't look at something and stare at it. They're scanning. And if they note what you have, if it's a visual, if it's a statement or whatever, only 1 in 6 times, roughly, are they going to do anything beyond just simply noting it. They're going to look a little bit closer. And if they do look a little bit closer, they're going to look for about 4 seconds. That's the amount of time that you have to get your message across, to make a brand impression, to tell them to do something, to have a cause and effect. That's based on all kinds of video analytics information out there. At the conference the other day, I confirmed with another company that does pattern detection, that counts faces and counts how long they look, that yeah, it's 3 to 4 seconds. There are cases when it can be longer than that. I've seen research that suggests in some circumstances people in this medium look for as long as 7 seconds. But if you think about it, 7 seconds is not very long still. So that gives you time to maybe show 4 elements. This is an outdoor ad, but I think it's a good example of an industry that's understood by and large because it's a glance medium that they have to get the message across very, very quickly. Here's another one. This is actually in the digital signage space. This is in a Verizon store. I think it's really good, and it shows how less really is more, that there's just a big visual, simple statement, logos, we're done. It's effective. But how many spots out there actually respect that principle? How many networks out there are thinking in those terms? I do a lot of traveling, particularly in the last year, and I see a lot more of these things than I do of these things. If I go back here, this is in Heathrow Airport. It's a series of DailyDOOH screens down a corridor. This is an HP ad that's clearly just being shoveled from another medium onto this screen. This is not a knock on DailyDOOH at all. Great company. But their client said, this is the ad we want to run on here. And it's a print ad. It's a digital poster, or pardon me, a print poster. It's not something meant for this medium. There's too much going on in the ad. The text is too small. It's too high for people to absorb it. On the other hand, here's a Chanel ad. Same corridor, same day, same network. It was terrific. 8 to 10 seconds, a simple video piece of a model or a ballerina or something like that with a little stinger at the end with the Chanel brand. People would notice that even if they just glanced for a second, but the way they did the motion and everything else, I suspect they got pretty good recall on that. Let's talk a little bit about timing and duration of spots. A lot of the industry still uses 15s and 30s. They're adopting what's being used for broadcast, in part because they'd love to tap into broadcast dollars. 30-second spot in this medium to me does not make a lot of sense because, as you've seen, people don't look for anywhere near that long. This is research that Nielsen, the research company, did using technology called neuromarketing, where they use sensors on people's skulls, willing people, to measure brain activity as they're consuming media. In this case, they put 30-second ads in front of people and measured their effectiveness based on brain activity, and they found that people tune in and tune out of ads. There are peaks and valleys of effectiveness. There are times when they're just not interested in the spot. So what they did with that is they took the 30-second spot, took the blue parts of it, the effective parts of it, and turned that into a 15-second spot instead. And what they found is the 15-second spot was 90% as effective as the 30-second spot. And in other cases, the 15-second spots were actually more effective than the 30-second versions because they just used the optimized bits of it. So it's instructive in saying that longer doesn't mean better. A shorter, optimized ad can be actually more effective than an ad that's twice as long. So it tells you you need to think about the timing, and more is not more. This is something called a vine. It is a 6-second video. You're seeing a lot of this in social media. It's really aimed around people with smartphones who shoot very brief videos and send them to their friends. They post them up on their networks. But brands and agencies have started to jump on this because it's the flavor of the month and produce spots that they can inject into social media streams. And I think it's a fad, it's a gimmick, it'll go away because most of the stuff is awful or at best silly. There have been some good ones, but not many. What's encouraging though is you have brands and agencies thinking about spending time working on creative that's only 6 seconds long. And if they get in that mindset of producing stuff that you can actually get a brand impression across in that amount of time, that's great news for this industry because we need shorter spots to align with the amount of time that people actually do look. I would argue you'd be better off with 5 6-second spots than you would be with one 30-second spot. That brings me to what I call the digital sign of insanity. I'm going to take a sip of water and you can drink this in. It's truly insane. This is in a medical clinic waiting room in my hometown where I live, in Burlington, Ontario, up in Canada. There are 11 zones, 23 elements on this screen. Our brains can't possibly take in that much stuff. The path of least resistance is to not even start, to not even look. Now, you could argue this crazy screen is just something up in Canada. It's what happens in the hinterlands where Dave lives. They probably just got electricity last week. But I see it all over the place. And just to prove that point, I flew down to New York through Buffalo. And as I was waiting for my flight, I looked across the aisle and there was this screen for the Buffalo Visitor Center. And if you look at the bottom, you can just barely see there's a news ticker down there. I see these sorts of screens all over the place where they're trying to load as much as they can into it, and it makes absolutely no sense. But I see it all over the place, and what concerns me not so much is that it's everywhere. These are knucklehead companies that'll come and go. We've seen that for 15 years. My concern is much, much more that we have all kinds of people within our industry ecosystem that are almost celebrating this activity. If you look on any number of websites, you see showcases, you see layouts, you see templates, you see case studies, you see all kinds of things saying, this is what you do. They're not shouting from the rooftops, this is what you do, but that's what they're instructing them because people coming into this space are going to look at these layouts, look at these examples and think, oh, this is what I do. But it's not. It's absolutely not the thing to do. The reason that a lot of vendors do this is simply that they want to show they have the capability to integrate weather widgets, news tickers, multiple zones, segmented screens, integrated social media, all that sort of stuff. I get that, but everybody, virtually everybody can do that. So why is a focal point of your marketing? Instead, talk about your success stories, the way that companies, networks use screens, full screen in terms of their programming, or strip down the messaging, use big fonts, use big visuals, things that actually work. That's what you should be telling the end users. If your business model is about awareness and influencing consumer behavior, why distract people from the money message? It makes no sense to do that. You want them to look at the advertising or the key visual message, and if they've got 5 other things to look at on that screen, it doesn't work. I'll talk briefly about QSR. QSR is a great vertical. It's been very, very active. It's been terrific, particularly on the display market side, selling a lot of panels into fast food. And most of it's really done well, but we also see many, many cases of screens that I would call very expensive eye charts. There's too much on the screen. They're forgetting the basics of font size, font choice, color choice. And the net result is people can't actually read what's on these screens from the other side of the counters. You really need to think through what you're doing here, and as designers of this content, think in terms of what it looks like from 12 to 15 feet away, not from 2 feet away from the desk that you're producing it on. Same sort of thing, but different topic in terms of screen placement, where you put the screens in a store and what that does or does not do. This is a screen grab of a video of the store of the future that Staples announced several months ago. I saw this and went, oh Lord. The idea here is, in this store of the future, you're going to walk into the entry area and look up. You're going to look up like 5 feet from your natural line of sight. People don't do that. They don't look up there. The only useful thing to put something in a location that high is a basketball backboard. That's a better thing. And it's not just me saying this. There's lots of instructive research out there. There's a company in Chicago that does eye tracking, and they have tracked numerous brands and their promotional campaigns in stores and found, in general, people look forward or down. They don't look up. A good example of that was something that was done for a beer company, Anheuser-Busch. They had what they thought was a really nice piece of promotional print that they were suspending from ceilings. And the eye tracking study showed that the actual recall rate for it was close to zero. People did not look up. In the same vein, here's something I call the kaleidoscope effect. The idea that when you walk into a visual environment, you're often greeted with this kaleidoscope of colors and cues. And where you place things is really, really important. In this case, here's a screen that's in and amongst this kaleidoscope of things. And I'd argue it's the least noticeable visual element there. Made worse because of the screen layout and the content and everything else. But you have to think about where you place stuff and the size of it, the positioning, everything. Here's probably a better example. I was on holiday recently. My wife was in the change room of this retail store, and it's an apparel retailer for women, and talking to the manager and asking about the design of the store, because I thought it was pretty nice. And I said, are the screens included in the feature set when you open a new store? And she said, yes, they were, and she had no idea why, because they were too small, they were put in the wrong places, and nobody noticed them. If you've been looking at this for a while and wondering, well, Dave, where is the screen? There it is. There were 4 or 5 of these in the store, and they were so small it was pointless. Why even invest the dollars if you're going to do it? And you can't just say, well, yes, we do have digital signage. Put the visuals where they'll be seen, not where they fit, and make sure they are the biggest visual or the most noticeable visual in there, because you're investing a lot of money in it. It's not enough to just say, hey, we got it in there. Interactivity in digital signage is really, really important. It can have a big impact, but there has to be a lot of strategy and thinking behind it for it to be impactful. And what I see many, many times are what I call stupid people tricks, where interactivity is just a thing. We're going to do something that engages audiences, but it's not really thought through. The worst offenders are things that involve gesture. This is a case in the UK. Record label worked with an out-of-home company and a mobile app company to come up with an interactive screen in a shopping mall. The idea being that you would be able to dance virtually with this pop star in front of a digital poster. Over the campaign, they got 51 interactions. 51 period, not in an hour, not in a day, 51 in 2 weeks. I would not want to be the agency or the out-of-home company guy who pitched this thing and sit in front of the record label and say, Here's what happened. There's going to be a lot of frowns in that room. Interactive is great, but it works best when it makes something faster, easier, or better. If the whole plan is around it being cool, you're setting yourself up for a world of pain in most cases. I'm a news guy. I spent my first 20 working years in the newspaper business. I'm a news junkie, but I have a big problem in most cases with news content in digital signage. I don't think it's there because it's informing audiences. I think it's largely there because it's cheap and easy, and it allows networks to say, yes, we steadily refresh our content. But is it content that anybody actually cares about? Maybe 10 to 15 years ago, absolutely. We didn't have a world full of smart devices and tablets. We didn't have ubiquitous connectivity, but we have that now. So I think we really, really need to think about whether news content on screens is the right thing to do or it's the easy thing to do. Here's an example of what I think is a case of using it because it's easy to just kind of fill up the programming wheel. This was when I was in New York. It's a 2x2 video wall from Citibank. This was facing the sidewalk on one of the main streets. The idea being you're going to walk by, stop cold and stare at this paragraph of news and the little photo. I don't think anybody does this. I think this is just grabbing stuff, throwing it on there so that there's a larger, more robust programming wheel. I've certainly never seen anybody stop cold and look at these things. If you're going to do this, at least present it well and go full screen and just have the headline and the photo. That would have a better chance of stopping people and getting people to look and then maybe see the ensuing message from Citibank. The idea with a lot of digital out-of-home networks these days is to go after the millennials. But research will tell you they don't consume media in the same way, and they're not interested in news headlines the way old fogies, old farts like me are. One of the interesting things I saw in the DPAA conference that I was at the day before I did this presentation was from media people who were talking about content and how quality content drives CPM values. If you have quality, relevant messaging on a screen, you're going to get better CPMs. If you have crap on there, he didn't quite say it, but that's the inference, you're not going to see that. Weather is another thing that makes me a little bit crazy. We all say everybody loves the weather, everybody talks about the weather. Sure, but there's no end of access to the weather, beginning with looking outside. In most digital out-of-home, digital signage networks, there are windows outside, or when you go to a store, people drove to that store and they walked across the parking lot before they went inside. They looked up. They already know what the weather is. I did a search on Google on weather apps because everybody has a smartphone these days. Curious to see just how prevalent weather apps were, and I got 1.5 billion search results on weather apps. There's no shortage of weather. So if you're going to put weather on your screens, really think through why you're doing that. It's not the sole source of that information. It's one of endless sources of it. And what it's doing is distracting, again, from the core message that you're trying to get across. You really, really, really need to think through your content model. And here's the simple questions to ask when you're designing a network and its programming. Who's going to see your screens and content? Who is that audience? What are they all about? Where's the best position to see, note, and absorb that content? Going back to what I was talking about at the onset of this presentation about all the visual cues, how they look, how they move through an environment, how long they're going to look. What do viewers want to know? What do they care about at that place and moment. What's the context? What's important to them then, not what's generally important to them. What's important as they're sitting there, as they're passing through there. What are you trying to do? You got to respect and earn the audience. I've got to emphasize that over and over again. You got to earn your viewers. Here's a quote that I found online. I read a blog called Branding Strategy Insider, and this is a New Zealander who wrote a piece. I really liked what he had to say because I thought it was very, very relevant to this space. Design works when people do what you want them to do as a result of what they're presented with. That speaks volumes about how you should approach programming. You want to look for that to happen. You want to look really, really closely. If more people did that, if they thought about their programming more than just the technology and more about the audience that they believe they have, I believe we would have far fewer ugly babies out there. And if I don't have to talk about your baby's ugly, that's terrific. I'd rather go to conferences, get in front of a microphone, and celebrate all the wonderful things out there, because there are a lot of great things happening in digital signage, but we're setting ourselves up for mediocrity if the people who invest in these networks, the people who buy time on these networks, continue to see stuff that makes them cross-eyed. Thank you very much for investing the time in listening to me.